Good morning, Skallywags, and welcome to another exciting episode in a series of enigmatic events. I'm Spoo.
I'm AJ. Today, we're heading off to Germany, 1920s, to the brutal murder of 6 people. Now, this murder has a lot of mystery and a lot of unanswered questions surrounding it.
On March 31st, 1922, the 5 members of the Gruber family and their maid were all killed in a small Bavarian town about 43 miles north of Munich, Germany. The victims include Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's children Cecilia and Joseph, and the Gruber's maid Maria Baumgartner.
The perpetrator of this grisly scene not only killed all 6 members of this household, but there is evidence that he lived, or they lived, or whoever lived in the home with the 6 bodies for up to 3 days. This murder has gone down in history as one of the most gruesome, puzzling, unsolved crimes in German history.
That's putting it lightly. Making things even more bizarre is that little strange things started happening around the farm months before the actual murder itself. 6 months before the murder, the family's previous maid had actually quit her position after she started hearing footsteps in the attic and basically thinking that the house was haunted. Then just a couple of weeks before the murder, Andreas actually found a strange newspaper laying around the house. He knew that he himself didn't purchase it, and nobody else in the family seemed to either, so no one had any clue as to where this paper came from.
Just a mysterious newspaper in your house. Yeah, that would be weird.
Definitely. Kind of thinking logically, he thought, well, maybe the mailman dropped it off by accident or something, but they, I guess, asked the mailman about this a couple of days later, but no one in the entire area subscribed to that particular newspaper.
That must not have been local.
Right.
There's also the fact that just days before the murder, Gruber actually went to neighbors and was telling tales. Basically, he was talking about he found a set of footprints in the snow that led from the forest to the family's farm machinery shed area, I don't know.
Right.
And there was a broken lock on that door there. So maybe something there too. Who knows? And as we stated earlier, the maid had quit like 6 months earlier because she thought the house was haunted. Now, Gruber said that the family was also hearing footsteps in the attic, but when he searched the house, he found nothing to make him think that it was anything.
You can kind of start piecing these things together if you kind of think about it, but we'll confirm those theories later on, I guess I should have said.
Neighbors told him he should reach out for help, tell the police and stuff, but I guess he was a stubborn man, probably, and he was just like, no, and he never asked for help from anyone. He just let that...
I dealt with it.
Yeah.
So according to a school friend of Cecilia's, she had been told that Victoria, Cecilia's mother, had fled the family farm the night before. That being the night before the murder. Apparently there had been a pretty big disagreement within the family.
Which, we'll touch on family dynamics in a little bit too.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, this one gets weird, and it may be a longer one than usual, so just strap in and hang
buckle
with us
up.
here.
We're in for a bumpy ride.
Yeah, she did say that her mother was found several hours later just kind of wandering incoherently in the forest. She's just kind of wandering around mumbling to herself.
So there was a fight. She gets mad. She takes a walk.
Right. No specific details were found as far as, what that quarrel may have been or what might have left to her running out like that, or even if it truly happened in the first place.
Cecilia is a 7-year-old girl telling a story at school, so
yeah. She's the only one that knows if it's true or not.
So what happened on that fateful day? Well, we don't know much, but what we do know, we're going to share. During the afternoon of March 31st, 1922, the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner. He's better with names than I am.
And I'm terrible with names, so what's that tell you?
She arrived at the family farm to get settled in. This was her first day. Her sister actually drove her there, dropped her off, stayed a little bit, to try to help get her settled into her room. And most likely, other than the murderers, she was probably the last person to see the whole family alive.
Then it appears that at some point during the night, Andreas, Cecilia the mother, Victoria, and Cecilia the younger Cecilia were all led out to the family barn. And there, one by one, they were viciously murdered. Unfortunately, there's not any kind of evidence that shows exactly how the killer or killers persuaded the family to head out to the stables and the barn or whatever, just that they were all out there. Whether they were brought out one at a time, whether they were all brought out together, completely unknown. And then once they had them all there, each one of them were struck in the back of the head with a mattock, which is a type of pickaxe.
It's one of those pickaxes that has the axe and then the
end.
flat end
Yeah.
on the other side, yeah.
The particular mattock that was used in the murder is believed to have belonged to the family, but the family's mattock, the mattock that was used in the murder, was not found on the scene. The same mattock was also used to kill the maid as she slept in her bed. And again, this was her very first day on the job.
I just can't even.
Right.
Poor maid.
Then to kill the youngest boy, Joseph. The same mattock also was used to kill him in his bassinet. He was only 2 years old.
Apparently 4 days passed between the murders and the discovery of the murders. What we do know is in this time, there were a couple things that came up. On April 1st, 2 traveling coffee salesmen, which I guess is a thing, they actually arrived on the farm Hinterkaifeck and were going to get their order. When they arrived, they noticed the door was locked. They knocked. They even went to windows to see if anybody would come out. No one responded. So they walked around the yard looking for anybody to get this order, and they didn't see anyone. They did notice that the machine house, the room that we were talking about earlier that had the broken lock, had the door open, but they didn't see anyone there either. So they left. Also noted was Kasilyev, a 7-year-old, did not attend school. People were worried about them because she hadn't attended school for a couple days, and the whole family missed their church worship, which was not common for them. I guess they went to church every Sunday. Also on April 4th, assembler Albert Hoffner came to the farm to repair a food chopper of the Grubers. He stated that he had been there for a while and hadn't seen any member of the family. He actually also stated he didn't hear any sounds other than, dogs barking and the cows, the farm animals. He stated that he stayed around for a little bit waiting for Mr. Gruber to show up so he could talk to him about the repairs. That didn't happen. Because no one came out, he actually just started doing his work. He knew what he had to do. He was there for about 4.5 hours, fixed the machine, and then without seeing anyone, left the farm.
Finally, at around 3:30 on the 4th, a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann and his stepson Joseph over to Hinterkaifeck to see if they could make contact with the Gruber family. When the boys came back and said, we didn't see anybody, Schlittenbauer and a couple of his friends went over there themselves. So they searched around the perimeter of the house, just kind of on the outside, didn't find anybody. So finally they made their way over to the barn. Entering the barn, of course, they discovered the very, very grisly scene. There they found the entire family stacked on top of one another in the hay. A short time later, they broke into the house, and that's where they found Maria, the maid, and Joseph, laying there dead in their beds.
The men immediately contacted the police, and an inspector, George Ryan Gruber, and his colleagues from the Munich Police Department arrived on the scene. Unfortunately, the scene was disturbed, and not in the way that you would think. It was disturbed by people who had been there, interacted with the scene, the murder scene, and the farm in general over the last few days, and also the day that the bodies were discovered. Neighbors and other people of the community had actually entered the house after the bodies were discovered to, make food at one point.
Like you do. On a murder scene.
Yeah, I don't know. They had actually even moved the bodies that they were stacked. They had actually moved the bodies a little bit. I guess, I don't know why, but maybe an attempt to see if everybody was okay. I don't know. I have no idea. But the scene was not intact.
The next day, the local physician performed an autopsy on all the bodies that were in the barn. It was quickly determined that the mattock was the murder weapon, and but after searching around, they like I said, they never found it on the scene. Hey guys, Spoo here, real quick, just in the middle of editing this video, and I ended up stumbling upon a mistake that we had made, so I wanted to jump in real quick to kind of clarify the mistake. Basically, we mentioned a couple of times that the Matic that was used as the murder weapon was never found. And initially, during the initial investigation, that was true. However, fast forward a year after the murders when the house was demolished, they actually did find the Matic at that time. Someone had actually hidden the Matic up in the attic underneath the floorboards above the kitchen, which actually raises a couple of things for investigators. First of all, it adds a little bit of credence and creepiness to that whole someone walking around in the attic thing, especially if you take into account the possibility that someone might have been hiding out in the attic prior to the murders. Secondly, the investigators believed that whoever would have known to hide something in this spot would have had a lot of knowledge about the house itself. They would have known about that hiding spot ahead of time. Secondly, and I know some of this stuff is actually being mentioned before we actually get to it in the video, but I wanted to go ahead and get this out of the way as well. We mentioned that they had ruled out the possibility of a robbery because a large amount of money was found in the house. Again, that is somewhat true. There was no cash found in the house, and they do believe that a large amount of cash was stolen. However, at the same time, there was a very large sum of money in coin that was still found in the house. They were actually more unsure if it was a robbery. That was always kind of the belief, was that it was a robbery, but they had no proof of that. They also found jewelry, but at the same time, they said that that jewelry was kind of peasants' jewelry, so nothing special, nothing really worth stealing, basically. Anyway, just wanted to throw those two things out there real quick. I apologize for the interruption, and back to the episode. Also discovered, and just a quick warning that this part may be somewhat upsetting, there was evidence that 7-year-old Cecilia had been alive for several hours after being struck in the head with the Matic. Apparently, she was found lying in a fetal position, and there were tufts of hair in her hands where she had basically been kind of pulling at the wound, trying to get it to stop bleeding, or just in horrific pain or what have you. But there were several tufts of hair lying around her and in her hands while she laid bleeding out in the hay.
During the autopsy, all the victims' skulls were removed and they were sent off into Munich. It was determined there that they were all murdered by the same weapon. At first, police thought that, it was a murder because it was a burglary gone wrong, like they were killed in the midst of a burglary. However, they found a substantial amount of money still in the house during their investigation, so that kind of derailed that thought. So if it wasn't for money, if it wasn't a burglary gone bad, why was this whole family and their maid murdered? And unfortunately, to this day, we don't have any clear answers to that question.
What we do know is that the killer or killers remained in the house for several days after the murders, as we mentioned before. And not just that, but they even went as far as to actually take care of the place. They fed cattle, they had eaten an entire supply of bread from the kitchen, and had also recently taken some meat down from the pantry and had cut through that. There's even an eyewitness that had seen smoke rising from the chimney, and even someone who had seen somebody on the farm walking around just a day or two after the murders took place. There was a local artist named Michael Plokel who had even passed by Hinterkaifeck on the 1st, so just the day after the murders had taken place, and saw someone was heating the oven. He actually stopped by for a moment, but whoever it was that was heating the oven quickly came up to him holding a lantern, which, of course, the light from the lantern, he held it in such a way that it kind of blinded the guy, and he quickly took off. But he comes running at him thinking, being very aggressive. So this artist, he just kept on going. So he never could see exactly who it was because of the way the lantern was being held, unfortunately.
He probably thought it was the owner of the property,
right,
because he's trespassing.
Right, but then you hear after the fact that, oh, no, they were dead by that point, and you think, okay, well, then who was it that I saw? And that would explain why they came aggressively at me.
Right.
He is also the one that noticed the smoke coming from the chimney and said that it was accompanied with a very disgusting smell. Now, what could it have been? I do not know. I mean, it's not like they burned the bodies or anything like that. So,
I mean, there could be more bodies.
I
don't know.
You never know.
I don't know.
Maybe there were 2 murders and in the end there were 1. I don't know. That's total speculation on my part. That instance was not investigated for whatever reason. They never were able to determine exactly what had been burned that night, what it was that caused that horrific smell. They never even looked into it.
Other witnesses have come forward to say that they saw strangers in the area. On April 1st, this is the day after the murder, a local farmer and butcher said that he actually saw 2 figures on the edge of the forest on his way home. And of course, at the time, he didn't think very much of it. They ran off into the forest when he was approaching, and he just thought, oh, 2 strangers. He didn't actually think anything of it until he heard about the murders. He, thought that it was peculiar and that he should notify the police that he saw 2 strangers.
Short time later, in the middle of May, so a little over a month later, another witness came forward. This one claimed that a stranger had approached him in the middle of the night, like somewhere around midnight while he was out kind of tending to some of his animals and things. Someone came up and started asking all sorts of questions about the murders. In the midst of all of this questioning, he just suddenly yells out, "I'm the one who murdered them," and took off running off into the woods. I mean, I could see that kind of thing happening today, but back then, not quite as much. People,
I don't know, yeah.
Trolling wasn't as big of a thing back then. But regardless, this particular stranger never identified. And it's another one of those situations where we don't even know if it actually took place or if the guy's just making it up.
It's all hearsay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Despite having no clear motive, the police actually did gather a list of potential suspects. However, no arrests were made, and the murderer, of course, we're talking about it, was never found. The case was actually closed officially in 1955, so that brings us to,
who were the suspects? Well, up first we have Carl Gabriel. And if that last name sounds familiar, it's because he actually was Victoria's husband. He had been reportedly killed during World War I, but there were a lot of people that believed that he was still alive because his body was never recovered. So a lot of theories and conspiracy theories started popping up that he had actually escaped the army or had possibly escaped from a Russian prison camp and had returned home just to kill the family, I guess. As far as what motive he would have had to kill his wife and her family, well, that's where we get into the strange details that we mentioned about the Gruber family.
Now remember we said that Victoria's son, the youngest victim, was 2 years old. Well, her husband was missing for longer than that. So not her husband's child. That's a big thing in the 1920s. A lot of people believed that the neighbor who discovered the bodies, Lorenzo, that he was actually the father. And, that was a rumor that held like a lot of people believed until we have DNA. DNA testing of Joseph and the son of Victoria and the others actually proves who the father is. And it is none other than Victoria's own father, Andreas. So that could be motive if her husband did come back. And
yeah.
But that being said, do we think that Carl was alive? Like, do we think that he came back and discovered this horrific thing and decided to kill the whole family, including his daughter? That's the thing, Cecilia was his daughter. There's actually no evidence to any of that. So what do you think?
The next suspect is actually Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Not only was he the one that discovered the bodies, but he also had a romantic relationship with Victoria and even believed that Joseph was his son. In fact, on Joseph's birth certificate, the initials LS appear, so that could either be Lorenz Schlittenbauer, or it could actually be just one of the attending nurses that were present there. We're not entirely sure. It's possible that maybe he found out of Joseph's actual parentage and became insanely jealous. And while that is nothing more than just speculation, it's entirely possible. A couple of little things that he did that make him look bad, we'll just say that.
He actually was on the police radar. They actually had him as a suspect. They questioned him and stuff. And it was because of things that he did when they discovered the bodies. When him and the other neighbors arrived, they had to break down the door to the barn. But when Joseph's body, the little baby's body, and the maid weren't there, he actually ran to the house and unlocked the door with a key.
Yeah.
He told, the people he was with, he was worried about Joseph. Where's Joseph? And I guess he was like panicking, and he just ran to the door and unlocked it. This key was actually reported missing by Mr. Gruber when he was talking to his neighbors about all the suspicious things happening a few weeks earlier. It's totally possible that Victoria actually gave him the key. If she had a romantic relationship with him, it's totally possible that he had that key so he could sneak in under her father's nose,
right.
That sort of thing. But what we do know is that police actually had concerns about him during the early days of the investigation because of these facts, because he knew to run into the house and he had a key and all of that.
Like he conveniently knew where to go.
Yes.
When they first searched, they searched around the house, meaning they literally walked around the outside of the house and was like, well, didn't see anybody. So they immediately beelined it for the barn.
Right.
And that's where they found the bodies. And then he immediately beelined it to the house where he had a key to let himself in.
Yeah, he had the key on him. He didn't open the door when he was there.
Right. And and not just the whole, romantic relationship, but he was a neighbor.
Yeah.
Was their next door neighbor. So it's entirely possible that, I know that I've been in situations where I know my neighbor well enough that I've given them a key that, hey, if I ever, I'm gone for a day or, a couple of days or whatever, can you kind of just check the mail and here's a key, put it inside. Whatever. There's a number of reasons that he might have had a key.
Yeah, we don't know.
Right. What we do know is that in addition to all of the suspicious things that he did, one thing that is definite that he did, he moved the bodies. There were also a number of comments that he made over the course of many years after the murders that kind of built onto that suspicion, especially among the locals. About a year after the murders, the Hinterkaifeck farm was torn down. It was completely demolished. They didn't want it to be kind of this monument of death, basically. But there was a local man that said that about in 1925, so just a few years after the murders, that they had actually seen Lorenz visiting the remains of the farm on a number of occasions. Now, again,
if he was in love with Victoria,
thinks that Joseph is his son.
That
makes
reasonable,
sense.
yes.
Right. But then when he was asked why he was there, that's not what he told them. Instead, he said that the killer had attempted to bury the family's remains in the barn, but had been hindered by the frozen ground. Well, that's interesting information that you have that only the killer would have. But, he's the neighbor, so he is going to know if the ground was frozen at that time.
There was snow.
So, yeah.
We know there was snow. It's cold.
Yes. So definitely. And enough snow that you can see footprints in the snow clearly leading one way and not the other. Yeah. So he would know what the weather conditions were like at the time.
But it's still suspicious.
Definitely suspicious. Yeah. You're going to this place of the woman that you love, the child that you think is yours. But when someone's like, what are you doing here? You don't say either of those things. Instead, you're like, the killer tried to bury the bodies, but was unable to because the ground was frozen, and this doesn't sound creepy at all.
Another suspicion of why Lorenz could possibly have killed the family is because of financial support. Child support for Joseph. This is our love child. I need help raising him. Give me your money. Of course, again, that's all speculation. And in 1941, Lorenz actually filed a suit for defamation of character, basically, with all of these rumors going around, and he won. I would like to see that court documents. Right. I didn't find any. Up next in our suspects are two brothers, Carl and Andreas S. We didn't get a last name.
No last name.
Just an initial.
Or maybe S was the last name. We don't know.
In 1971, a woman actually wrote a letter citing the events of her youth. Now, in this letter, she says that her mother was having a conversation with another woman who was the mother of two men, Carl and Andreas S. During this conversation that she overheard, she said that the woman had stated that her sons were there at the farm during the murder, and that one of her sons, Andreas, had previously stated to her that he regretted that he lost his pocket knife. You know, this is 1971, it's 50 years later, she's retailing a story of her youth. But what is interesting is that, in fact, a pocket knife was found on the farm. It was actually found in 1923 when the farm was demolished, and there's no evidence that it belonged to anyone in the family. I guess they asked people and no one recognized this pocket knife. So maybe we have suspects? I don't know.
But this claim was far from being any kind of proof. Not only was this just an account of someone who apparently had overheard this conversation, but this was a conversation that was heard 50, 60 years before, when this person was 12 years old. You also have to take into account that this was a farm, so a pocket knife on a farm is a pretty common thing to have. It could have literally belonged to anyone.
Anyone who was there that day,
Yeah.
anyone who visited the farm before it was demolished.
And there's nothing even saying that it was dropped the day of the murders.
No.
It could have been dropped 10 years before, as far as we know. In fact, the family's former maid, the one that had quit 6 months prior, when they asked her about it, she said she seems to remember even seeing the knife laying around the ground while she was still working on the farm. And that was 6 months before the murders.
I find that weird, though. Like, you don't pick it up.
I mean...
I feel like you pick it up, you have children.
Sure.
But, I mean, I guess it's a different age.
Yeah, true.
Next on our suspect list, we come to the brothers Bickler and George Siegel. These suspects were brought to the attention of the police by the former maid. She had worked with the family from November 1920 until September of 21. She actually suspected the brothers, Anton and Carl, were guilty of committing this murder. Now, she recalls a statement that Anton made once: "The family ought to be dead." I mean, that's pretty damning.
Yeah. She also claims that the family's dog barked at everyone and yet never barked at Anton. And then we get to something that's going to come up a couple of times,
Yeah.
and that is that she claims that she was in fact woken up on a number of occasions by who was then at the time a stranger, standing at her window in the middle of the night. The maid believed that this was actually Carl Bickler, the brother of Anton. She claims that in this conversation that he was complaining that the Gruber family didn't pay their employees enough. And that's actually where George Siegel enters the picture. He worked on the family's farm.
Along with Anton.
In fact, apparently Siegel had even broken into the family's home at one point and had stolen a bunch of things, but Siegel, he denied that, never admitted to it. And it was never proven that he actually did, but that was kind of the rumor. He did, however, admit to being the one that carved the handle of what would later become the murder weapon. However, much like pretty much all of our other suspects, there's no actual hard evidence to link these guys to the crime in any way, shape, or form, other than circumstantial
Hearsay. So we come to the maid again. Now, the maid actually threw out another set of brothers as suspects. She actually said that she thought the Thaler brothers might be involved. Now, the Thaler brothers had committed several burglaries throughout the area. This was before the family was murdered. And just like the mysterious man who showed up at her window to talk about wanting to hurt the family or whatever, she actually says that Joseph Thaler showed up at her window at night where he...
Are you starting to sense a bit of a pattern here?
She has a lot of men visitors,
Yeah.
where he asked questions about the family. She said, of course, she wasn't telling them anything. She's not going to tell him anything, this strange man at her window at night, but he was asking questions about, like, who slept in what room. He stated he knew they had lots of money around, and, those kind of things. And why she threw the brothers out there is she states that this one man was standing there talking to her, asking her questions, but she saw another man in the shadows, in the bushes, asking questions under his breath for this man to ask her questions. I don't know. It's very Cyrano. And then she said that the two men, I guess during one of these conversations, looked to the machine house, which is where
Right.
the Matic would be.
You know, while we don't know exactly what that implies, that is one where the keys to the machine shop are missing. The lock to the machine shop had been broken into. And that is also where the set of footprints had led to that never came back out. But again, just like the other one, all we have here are the statement made by the former maid, and kind of like we said a second ago, you know, it's rather suspicious that she's got all these people to throw under the bus, and all of these people that she is throwing under the bus had come to her window at night to talk to her specifically about killing the family.
Also, what I found suspicious, and it just hit me, is like she says they were asking who sleeps in what room. How did they know what her room was? Like, I'm just like, what? I feel like it's weird. Right?
That's great.
Sometimes things come to me late.
No, that's not suspicious at all.
So our last suspect, we're going to go away from the maid for a little bit. Our last suspect actually comes from author Bill James.
Author Bill James wrote a book called The Man from the Train. And in this book, he actually alleges that the serial killer Paul Mueller may have been responsible for this particular murder. The murder at Hinterkaifeck actually bears a lot of striking resemblance to a couple of other murders that Mueller had committed in the United States. There was the slaughter of an entire family in an isolated home. There was the use of a blunt object and even a pickaxe specifically to commit one of his murders, and apparent absence of a robbery as a motive was also kind of suspect. So, I mean, a few puzzle pieces that fit together that makes it look pretty similar.
I mean,
but this guy's in the U.S.
Yeah. Or is he? He was a German immigrant, and he was on the run. Like, people had him as a suspect for these other murders, which took place before this one. In this book, he theorizes that the serial killer fled the United States and went back home to Germany, which would put him in the area at the time of these murders.
So we've got a guy that is already a killer, has already carried out murders very similar to the Hinterkaifeck murders.
A lot.
Who just happens to be a German immigrant, and as far as after his murders in the U.S., just poof, disappeared.
So it's totally possible that he, got an identity and went back home.
And that actually kind of wraps up the actual list of suspects. Yeah. But we actually have a couple of questions ourselves, some of which we've already kind of asked, but we're going to reiterate some of these.
Yeah, because these are theories of ours, because when we're going through this, some of them are a little bit red flaggish.
Oh yeah, big time.
As we mentioned before, the maid. The former maid is very suspicious to me just because she has all these late night visitors. I find that weird. Did she tell her employers about these visitors who are wanting to harm her employers?
I mean, because it's never said that she had any real problem with them or anything.
No.
So
no.
Yeah.
She worked with them for them for a year and a half. But with that being said, if she hadn't vocalized having problems with her employers, would all these men who had problems with her employers come to her window at night to discuss things?
Right.
Like, I find that a little suspicious. I find it suspicious that in 1922, a maid in a house has, like, people knocking on her window. It's more like a brothel kind of thing than a maid. I don't know.
And I mean, even if these conversations never did come up, was she ever looked at as a suspect?
Right.
I mean, she claims at least that she didn't quit her position because of any problem with the family. She claimed that it was because the house is haunted. I hear footsteps in the attic. And if the conversations did happen and she did inform the family about the conversations, why was nothing done about them?
I mean, Mr. Gruber is stubborn. We do know this.
Yeah.
But I feel like he would have said something to somebody.
Yeah. And if they did happen, but she did not tell the family, then why not?
Right. She's also there at a time where Victoria was pregnant with Joseph, or Joseph was just born. She might know that secret as well. It's also rather convenient that she leaves 6 months earlier and the family is safe, except they hear the footsteps in the attic and all that stuff. But on the very day that her replacement comes to live with the family and the replacement are all murdered.
Either that's just horrible timing.
So bad.
or not so much a coincidence.
I'm wondering if she would have been considered a suspect today. 1922, she's a maid. Women were considered, the weaker sex back then. We're not, but we were considered that. And I don't think that they would have even put a woman on the radar for a brutal murder like this. I don't think if she did it alone. But we do know that women are capable of murder. We do know that women are capable of serial murder. It's not as common, but we know now that it is something that happens. And women can plan murders a lot.
But speaking of the maid and her quitting, she quit because she mentioned hearing the footsteps up in the attic. So the house must be haunted. So she quits. She moves out. And then after she's gone, suddenly the family starts hearing footsteps in the attic as well. And then you have things like keys going missing. A strange newspaper appears that no one has subscribed to. A set of footprints that comes out of the woods leading up to the house and not back out. Meaning that whoever walked in from the woods stayed for a while. Is it possible that the murderers stayed in the house after the murders because they were staying in the house already before the murders?
Right, like living up in the attic.
Yeah.
Like a stranger in your attic.
There's a lot that points to that being the case.
Also, if that's the case, and the maid had gone up to investigate, she might have befriended this person.
Right.
And that's also a theory. Like, if there's somebody living in the attic and she's the maid, I feel like they would just send her up there
right.
to investigate. And if she met someone up there... Yeah. I don't know what she gets out of it afterwards. I don't know what she gets out of it after their death.
Right.
But who knows what anybody gets out of murder. So what do you think? Who killed this whole family in cold blood? So let us know what you think in the comments below.
So I know that this case is a lot longer than the cases that we normally cover, and there's actually a lot that we left out. We mainly hit on the bigger points and left out the smaller points.
Like the family's heads were lost.
Yeah.
When they were sent off to get, determined if the weapon was the same weapon, they were actually lost and the bodies were buried without heads.
Yeah, that's just creepy.
If you have time, we encourage you to actually delve into this case yourself because like he said, we did leave a lot of points out just for time, but it's a very interesting case.
Yeah. But again, we ask, what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. I don't know why I put that in there twice, but hey, whatever.
Be sure to follow us on all our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Feel free to stop by and say hi. And as long as you're here on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. We have new content every day, Monday through Friday. There's a different show. It's a little something for everyone.
Yeah. But most importantly, drop us a comment. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know your theories. And most importantly, let us know what you want to see next in this series of enigmatic events. Thanks for watching.
Bye.